My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Patrick. Can everyone hear me all right? Marvelous. So what I'm going to talk about is the topic title is Troubleshooting Sponsorship. I've talked a lot about sponsorship over the last few weeks, and there was one particular talk on the basics of sponsorship. I'm going to cover that ground a tiny bit again so we have a context. Then I'm looking at what can go wrong. My date of sobriety is 24th of July 1993, and I sponsored several hundred people formally, and I've talked to many others in a sponsorial sense. So not every form of sponsorship is called sponsorship. And a lot of what is called sponsorship is something else. A lot of what is called sponsorship is nothing at all. It's like companies that have a brass plate to say that it's their registered address, but there's no one trading from there. So just because one's got a sponsor doesn't mean one's being sponsored. Just because one hasn't got a sponsor doesn't mean one isn't being sponsored. I'm going to utter a dreaded phrase. I shouldn't really say this because it's so vile, but sponsorship is a state of mind, because it really is. It's giving someone else's input the status of authority. So the person can be sponsoring you without their knowledge. In 1993, Maureen said to me, she was never formally my sponsor. In 1993, she said to me, always go to 2 meetings a week minimum, preferably 3. Never, ever go below that. Now, she mentioned that to me as a newcomer 29 years ago. But to me, that still has the force of authority. So it's been basically 20 years since I've breached that. I don't think a week has gone by without me going to 2 or 3 meetings. Of course, now I'd rather feel sorry for sponsees, because at least a number of years ago, if you wanted to avoid meetings, all you have to do is go on holiday to rural France and Bob's your uncle. Whereas now it's very difficult to avoid meetings. I tell you something, I'm going to say things I shouldn't say. I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, how are you getting on with your, I don't know what it was, step 8 or 9? And they said, oh, I'm not doing anything at the moment. I said, why not? And she said, well, my sponsor's away. And I said, in a country without the internet? Really? She's that far away, but she's on another planet. There's no excuse anymore, and that works both ways. If I want sponsees to be diligent about this, I have to be diligent about this. So my alcoholism doesn't have a holiday. Why would I have a holiday from something which brings joy as well? If sponsorship is not bringing joy, you're doing it wrong. If it's heavy or burdensome or anything else, something is going wrong. So anyway, that's a digression. What are the basics of sponsorship? You set the individual up with a daily program to keep them busy. Now, it doesn't matter what, really. As long as it's anything you suggest is going to be better than whatever they have planned for themselves. So you set them up with a daily program. If you have any doubts about what that should consist in, the contents of pages 84 to 88 of the big book are a pretty good place to start. You team them up with other people in recovery who are doing things a similar way, in other words, properly out of the big book. You set them up with some good meetings to go to. You give them an exercise to get on with. with the steps, start them on the steps straight away, as long as their brain works. Okay, sometimes people need a few days after they finished formally detoxing before they can really take on board information, but you can give them something to do. They can read a story at the back of the book. I mean, you doesn't need to be elaborate. So you get them working on steps 1 through 9. So they're never left with nothing to do. So they're always left in a position where if they want to spend 16 hours a day on recovery related things, you've stacked them up with so many things to do. They won't be scratching around looking for something to do. This means they never need slip because they always have plenty of things to do instead of slipping. Slipping is a choice. If you give them another option, slipping now becomes a choice, not inevitable. There's a lot of hiding behind powerlessness. You're powerless until you're given all of the direction and encouragement necessary to access power. And these days, there's absolutely no excuse for it. In early AA, they would deem a slip as connoting your resignation from AA. Even in the hallowed big book, in the story Alcoholic Anonymous #3, they said, can you stay sober for 24 hours? And he says, sure, anyone can do that. So they said to me when I was new, don't drink, go to meetings, whatever happens, don't drink. The only thing you have to do today is not drink. What do you do rather than drink? You do anything but drink. And we can improve on that by giving them lots of uplifting and edifying and informative and social things to do. But it's unnecessary. Of course, if someone hasn't fully committed to staying sober forever, albeit one day at a time, for good and for all, but you handle it one day at a time. If they haven't committed to that because they're still dithering, they're going to relapse anyway. Well, they're not relapse, they're going to continue drinking. You can only relapse if you've recovered. Unless you've completed the first 9 steps once, what you're going through is not a relapse. It's a continuation of drinking because your condition is untreated. You often hear people saying, oh, this is my 7th relapse, it's my 9th relapse. No, you've never recovered. This is simply active alcoholism. Active alcoholism has breaks in it. Just because Tom always says alcoholism is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. And the gorilla occasionally takes a nap. Now, it doesn't mean you suddenly recovered. It just means the gorilla is asleep for a few days. And just because you're knocking around meetings does not mean you've recovered. People talk about, I've been in the program for many years. And what they usually mean is, I've been physically in the same place as AA meetings for many years. That's very, very different than being in recovery. It's very different than having recovered. The last thing a sponsor does is be available for ad hoc help. So if you've got a question, ask it. I'll give you a solution or an idea or something, a box around the ears. But I'll give you something, so I'm available. There we go. Most people don't call me, they're too scared. I wouldn't call me. I mean, I don't blame them for 1 minute. Anyway, but the point is, you give them plenty to do. You signal your availability. When they contact you, you respond. I've got a service level agreement. I don't literally have one, but figuratively of respond within 24 hours. Frankly, it's usually a few minutes, unless it's late at night, in which case the poor soul will have to wait till tomorrow and go to a meeting in California or something. So those are the basics. And as long as you stick to that, you give them something to do, they complete it, they come back, they say, I've completed it. You go through it, you give them the next thing, and eventually, a few weeks or months later, they've completed all their amends and they start sponsoring other people. That's how it ideally works. And you know what? It sometimes does work like that. It really does. Now, the rest of my talk's going to be about where that doesn't happen. And this is all said with love. my first little heading, I've got some notes here, you see. The first one, as a sponsor, I've got to remember I'm not important. I'm no one's savior. No one needs a special sponsor. If you're the only one that can help Susan or Billy, no one can help them, including you. If it wouldn't matter one fig who sponsored them, they're going to get well. Because the answer is the program and God. I'm the dinner lady slopping out the food onto the little metal tray in the mental asylum. I'm not the food. I'm not the chef. I'm just the dinner lady. It ain't personal. This is very important. Sometimes people will seek a person out like a sort of heat-seeking missile, and it's always deadly. If people are very keen for you to sponsor them, there's something up. Always ends in trouble. If they think, well, you'll do, oh, and so would a dozen other people, but you'll do, you're here, I'll ask you, fair enough. That works out pretty well usually. We'll come to more of that later. One thing gets up my nose is being audited by prospective sponsees who've got a little checklist. No. Look, if you've seen me in a meeting, you've heard me, either you trust me or you don't. If you trust me that I've got a process that works. I won't go down that path. So what I do, I present to people what I have to offer. I won't reconcile it with their expectations of what it's going to be. If they know so much, why are they in such trouble? But now newcomers don't audit you generally. Newcomers, it's a slightly different thing. They're going to be very mistrustful generally, and it's fair enough to spend a good half hour setting out the stall of everything that's involved. So that's absolutely fine. But what I mean by auditing is when people start to go into details about specific aspects of the program. So exactly how do you do step 4, or what's your position on this aspect of step 9 or tradition? No, we're not going to do that, because then they're asking me to fit myself to what hasn't been working for them, or they wouldn't need a new sponsor. It's all back. That whole auditing thing is all backwards. If the decision about whether or not someone is going to proceed is hanging on the details of how you answer those questions, it's dead in the water anyway, because there's going to be, if there are roadblocks now, there are going to be roadblocks later. Either you, my other half says about relationships, either you trust the person or you don't. If you don't, find someone you do. If you trust no one, you've got a trust problem, not a sponsor selection problem. What's next? Oh yeah, something a friend of Tom says, you're doing really well when you're willing to get well someone else's way. And I think the best approach to looking for a new sponsor is to say, I'm in real trouble. You seem to be doing better than me. Will you show me how? That's a really good basis rather than going with a shopping list. Everything that got you to this point as a prospective sponsee may be great because it got you this far, but if it could have got you further, it would have done so. Therefore, you have to be willing to throw everything out. I present myself candidly to prospective sponsees. So if they need to know about me, a little bit about me, that's fine. If it comes through recommendation, I'll have to get that information from someone else. Again, I'm not going to be interviewed. I'll start by asking questions. If they don't want to answer the questions, again, we can't proceed. I'm not going to play Dance of the Seven Veils with someone as they gradually unveil themselves, you know, veil by veil. No. If someone needs to hang around, meetings for a while just to watch you in action, come for fellowship, get to know you, absolutely fine. I totally get that. But my experience, even as a newcomer, I got an instinct. I'm not a particularly instinctive or an intuitive person, certainly not when I was new. I mean, I was barely sober and I was mentally ill, but I had a perfectly good instinct about who was sound and who wasn't. I really did. Within a few weeks in AA, I got the sense of who I could trust and who I couldn't, and I was right every single time. The first few weeks were a bit ropey, so I got taken in. But after that, I think we learn very quickly in AA. So again, this is a matter of trust. If you're going to turn your will and life over to a program, ask someone to guide you, you've got to tell them things like where you live, who do you live with, do you have a job, are you married, how many people are you married to, do you have any children? Basic questions like that. Some people won't even say that. You can't proceed on that basis. The most common difficulty I've experienced in sponsorship over the years is something I call the 4 R's: reaction, resistance, rejection, reproach. This is where someone comes to me and says, I've got a problem, what's the solution? And I present the solution. They say, well, I don't like that. They react to it. Something's been set off. Pitch goes up. All the reasons why it's inappropriate. They reject the input, and then they reproach you or question your motives in suggesting it. So the whole thing gets turned around beautifully. I've done this to sponsors. I did this for donkey's years. I go to someone for help. They'd offer me some suggestion, and I would explain to them as though they were a child how stupid their suggestion was and how it couldn't possibly work, and then stand there metaphorically with my hands on my hips saying, well, what else have you got, Buster? Now we've got rid of option A. What about option B? What else have you got in the drawer there? And of course, this won't do. This didn't get me anywhere. So I'm afraid after years of trying to negotiate with people who are in a mindset of reaction, resistance, rejection, reproach, I don't negotiate anymore. This is what I have to offer, end of. If you don't like it, that's totally fine, but maybe you should find a sponsor whose input you do like, okay? And again, if you don't like anyone's input, you've got an input acceptance problem, not a sponsor problem. So I don't negotiate. I'm very quick to say, if you don't like what I offer, ask someone else, because that brings it to a head very quickly. Never ever give in to flattery or, but you're the only one who can help me. I've had that and I've fallen for that one. It's deadly. There was someone many years ago, nice person, but they resisted. I said, well, maybe you should get a different sponsor. And they said, oh, yeah, you can help. And I relented. And I spent the next 2 years regretting it because there was resistance every step of the way. If the resistance is there, either it's broken instantly, or very often it is broken. What people are doing, I suspect, because I've done it, is they're testing how negotiable is this person? To what extent can I set the terms of this relationship? And if you set your terms, no, this is what I have to offer, this is how I do AA, boom, then you can get it clear straight away. And most people will actually try and test the boundary. Most people realize there's a firm boundary and they actually like the boundary because now they know where they are. If they think you're negotiable, you never know how negotiable. They spend the rest of their life, the rest of their relationship with you, negotiating, trying to figure out how much can they get away with without you severing the umbilical cord. It's best to be clear up front. Don't start nicey-nicey and then come in with a boundary 6 months later. That's called bait and switch, and it's unfair. So be a bastard from day one, a glorious bastard, a nice bastard, but be the bastard from day one. And then there's no, when you're a bastard 3 weeks later, there's no surprise. I already know you're a bastard. There you go. And it's not being a bastard, it's being firm. And alcoholics don't like people who are firm, maybe because lots of professionals have bent round them for years and pandered, and family members and other people who could maybe handle an Al-Anon meeting or two. One particular form of resistance is insecurity on the part of the sponsee. So they start to voice lots and lots of doubts about recovery, about AA, about the literature. Is it a cult? You know, they're not sure about the program. They've got problems with meetings. They're not sure about the home group. They've got misgivings about you. They're resistant to the higher power. A Catholic did something to them in 1974. So there's obviously a problem with God. That they're unwilling or whatever, and there are lots of reasons why they're unwilling. It's because they're abandoned when they're a kid, and if they get it wrong, then maybe you'll abandon them, so they don't want to take the action and risk being abandoned. Do not get dragged into any of these discussions. Either take the action or don't. And if they say, I'll try, what they're saying is, I won't. There is no try. Either you do it or you don't. There you go. And if you don't, you'll have the consequences. If you do, you'll have the consequences. I can't make someone else willing. Friendship and sponsorship. Don't do it under any circumstances. No exceptions. No exceptions. If you make friends with your sponsees, you'll pull punches. You won't tell them the truth. You'll hold back. You'll let them get away with shit that your sponsor wouldn't let you get away with, and it does them no good. So no wittering, no sending little pictures of cats, none of that. If you don't communicate with your sponsor in any way you wouldn't communicate wisely with a doctor, a lawyer, or a high court judge. It's an intimate relationship, but so is your relationship with your gynecologist. But you don't send your gynecologist cat pictures. It's a formal relationship. For it to work, it's got to stay formal. Sympathy. Now, you have empathy for their suffering. And if you're of the, if you want to throw them a bone, you say, that sounds really hard. Now, would you like a solution? Don't indulge victimhood, because you're not helping. One particular form that happens, sometimes people are very skillful in portraying the events of their lives in such a way that even you think, oh, you're getting a really rough deal from your boss. You're getting a really rough deal from your mother or your father. Often it's people who are still living with their parents. If they've managed to wangle still living with their parents at 28, 38, 48, you've got black belt, boss level manipulation going on there. You've got to be very careful. And it's very easy, especially if they're coming at it from an Al-Anon angle, if their family is very alcoholic or messed up, you can come in very dangerously from an Al-Anon angle and accidentally sympathize with their position and forget that there is another side to these stories. Unless you've heard the mother's side and the father's side and the boss's side, do not believe a word, because it's their position right now. If you sympathize, you're reinforcing the victimhood and the lack of agency. You help them look at the situation objectively, look at where their belief thinking behavior are flawed, leaving criticism of other people out of it and attribution of blame out of it. Next topic, relapse. What happens if your sponsee relapses? At the first relapse, I think it's legitimate to do a debrief afterwards, do a post-mortem and say, where were you going wrong? Where was there a fundamental resistance to staying sober? Was there an agreement in principle, but delay or prevarication or temporization or deferral or laziness or whatever it was, or other priorities or acting out, or maybe, you've been going to some online pharmacies. There are all sorts of reasons why people relapse or start drinking again. You assess what happened. You establish a new battle plan for it not happening again. If it happens again, let them go. I've never succeeded once they start relapsing or start drinking again. They've never got permanently sober with me. They've got permanently sober with someone else. There's a block. Let them try with someone else. I'm not special. They don't need me. And it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It hasn't worked. Something needs to change. Occasionally people are too quick to get rid of sponsees and end up with no sponsees ever. I'm much more likely, and I think most people are much more likely, to have sponsees stay their sponsees way beyond the point at which the relationship is effectively moving the sponsee forward in their recovery. I'm getting quicker and quicker to say bye-bye. And when you say bye-bye, you try and do it as nicely as possible. You sometimes leave the door open, say, look, if in a few months you want to have another go, we'll revisit it, we'll start it from scratch. But for the moment, I'm done. Go and ask someone else. But let's be friends. See you at the meetings. And then next time you see them at a meeting, chat to them pleasantly, just to make super clear there are no hard feelings. We've reset back to the initial position. We're just kind of buddies in recovery. If you feel resistance to letting go of a sponsee, you got an unhealthy attachment yourself. What's in it for you? The only question should be, what is in their best interests to make progress with the AA program? Personal affection or personal ambitions or it must not come into it. Half measures avail us nothing. They don't avail us half results. The half measures situation is very common. If there are half measures happening, it's exactly the same as with relapse. You shoot a bit of a rocket up them and it fixes it. And over the course of a few months, you may have to shoot more than one rocket up a person to just get them moving again. If the rocket doesn't work, drop it. 9 cases out of 10, I had a round of rocket shooting the other day. I thought, I'm nerve from anyone. Where are the buggers? So I shot a rocket up all the people who'd been slow at doing step work. And I think all of them got cracking within 24 hours. It works. Just a little reminder, it's not taking away people's responsibility because they're responsible, but the occasional reminder doesn't hurt, particularly as happens these days. There's a lot of remote sponsorship, particularly because a lot of people are in areas without great AA. So they've got an AA sponsor somewhere where there is good or better AA. So there are legitimate reasons these days for long distance sponsor. Always have been, but now it's possible to have long distance sponsorship. If you see them physically at meetings, you can have a little word in their shell like, and you don't need to shoot a rocket up them. If there's greater physical distance, it does need a bit of people do need a little bit of a kick. If it becomes persistent, then what I do is I set people a little task, like a little doable task, not a Herculean task. So I've got a morning meeting at 7 a.m. Online, so you can set the alarm for 5 to 7. That's not cruel. When I was a child, I had to get up at 6:15 to go to school, so I don't think it's unreasonable to get up at 5 to 7. Get up at 5 to 7, put a sweatshirt on, turn the computer on, boom. It's not a huge effort. If they can do that for a week, we'll build up again, and then we'll take it from there. If they can't do that for a week, there's a fundamental willingness problem there. The fact is, my experience is that people, if it's in their interest, if they perceive something to be in their interests, they're able to do it. I was the most unreliable person when I was very new, but my life depended on, I didn't have any source of income. There was no one to support me, and I was not eligible for any kind of state support because of my age and various other factors. If I didn't have a job, I wouldn't have anywhere to live. I wouldn't have any food. I wouldn't have anything. I had to keep the job. And it's funny how this very, very unreliable person was able to show up at this canteen in the City of London to carry casseroles at 7:30 in the morning. I'd never shown up anywhere in my life at 7:30 in the morning. When I was willing, because I was willing, I was able to do it. So I set people a willingness test sometimes, which is, and it's so measurable because either they're there in the meeting or they're not. You can't argue about whether you were there or not. It's a very elegant way of doing it. And if people are able to do that, the lesson is learned and they move on and they get back on track. If they're unable to do that, bye-bye. Love you, but bye-bye. Next topic, negative or positive fixations. Sometimes people get, for all sorts of reasons, and it's not because they're bad, it's just what happens. They imprint on you as a sponsor, like, you know, ducklings or something. Or you become the repository for all of their rage against authority figures and parents and whatever. As soon as you got one of those deals, bye-bye. When it becomes apparent that it's one of those either positive or negative fixations, you reboundary. You say, right, what is acceptable in this relationship is steps, traditions, concepts, and ad hoc application of the program to any situations arising in your life. We're not here for anything else. We're not here to act out the psychodramas. We're not here for me to play the role of mummy or daddy. We're not here for any of those other things. So do that elsewhere. Deal, and they'll say deal. And then either they can stick to it or they can't. If they can't park that stuff or shift it elsewhere or deal with it, just stop it now, because it won't end well, let me tell you. If there's now, sponsorship can get very heated, and my old sponsor Brian, stop that noise. My old sponsor Brian would say that all is fair in love and war. And you get a lot of rough and tumble in sponsorship. You're talking about really difficult stuff, and you may be the first person that has challenged the victimhood narratives that are pervading the person's consciousness, as indeed they pervaded mine. And when you challenge the ego's narratives, it becomes vicious in response. So you're going to get a lot of rough and tumble. The rough and tumble is a sign that you're getting close to the truth and you're making progress at last. This is all well and good, and no one's ever been hurt by a bit of rough and tumble. If it tips over into real aggression, then stop, either from you or from them. Stop it now. Find someone else, because that can't be fixed. Working out where the line is hard. And sometimes people are much more sensitive to that. Their threshold is much lower. Sometimes I'm the one with the lower threshold. They can actually handle a lot more than I can. I can't handle it, so I just stop, and that's fine. Next topic, brass plate sponsorship. Sponsorship in name only. My current view, I've had different views over the years. Anything I say may change. I mean, sometimes sponsees complain, well, the way you're sponsoring now is not the way you used to sponsor 20 years ago. It's because I'm different. I've changed. There we go. We're supposed to change and learn and grow, and it's really uncomfortable for people. So sorry, but that's gonna keep happening. So better get used to it. But my current view is there's nothing more deadly for someone who is 5, 10, 15 years sober than to have someone who is technically their sponsor, but they're not checking in with them. They're not doing quarterly run-throughs of the first 9 steps to keep the decks clear. They're not going to any of the same meetings, but they have someone who's 20, 30, 40 years sober as their sponsor, and they share about that in meetings. Oh, my sponsor's so-and-so, I got a sponsor who'd been sober all this time and, was sponsored by so-and-so who was sponsored by so-and-so. But there's no relationship there. There's got to be a relationship. If there isn't a relationship as a sponsor, I think it's my job to withdraw, so that the person is then left in a position where they literally have no sponsor, and they have to face the fact they've had no sponsor for days, weeks, months, or years, but now they have to face the fact they have no sponsor. So I'm harming someone by not encouraging the relationship to either be discontinued or maintained properly. So I go to the same meetings as my sponsor. Is that convenient? No, it's not convenient. Does that matter? No, I don't care, because I like my sponsor. I find him very useful. We talk on a regular basis. We get on very well. There's a relationship there. Now, how regular is regular? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Some people, some relationships don't need huge amounts of maintenance. Others need a lot of maintenance. I don't need a lot of maintenance with my sponsor, but I need to be in touch enough. Sometimes it's intensive, more often than not, because I run through the steps once a quarter. There's not a lot going on. When something happens, I get past it pretty quickly, usually. Not a lot sticks for long. Some people are, and I was like this, very resentful, very fearful, very self-obsessed. I know none of you are, but maybe one day you'll sponsor people who are very resentful, fearful, or self-obsessed. You give them the solutions, you work through the solutions with a few practical examples, and then it's over to them. I sponsored someone many years ago, and I mean, lots of people fall into this category. I fell into this category. They phone up with a resentment. You talk through it very, very diligently. You run through the book. You run through the inventory. I've written some more inventory, and they read out the inventory, and it's resolved. Oh, I see now. I can see I wasn't trusting God or something like that. Great. Marvelous. Phone up the next day, new resentment. You deal with it again. Phone up the next day, it's a new resentment. And you discover that the dance you're doing with them, processing the resentments, processing the fears, processing the self-obsession, the guilt, the remorse, the insecurities, is not doing anything. The dance is the purpose. There's some benefit or kick or payoff the person is getting from working themselves up into a lather, creating a huge drama, and then calling in the cavalry, and you come over the hill like Gandalf with the riders of Rohan, yet again replaying the same old scene, Groundhog Day, day after day. And there's a payoff on both sides. So there comes a point where you just have to say, you got a resentment? Great, we've dealt with that. Top of page 67. Any other questions? You got a fear. Oh, that means you must be relying on yourself rather than God. Page 68. What will God have you do and be? Any other questions? No, good. There comes a point you have to live the solution and not be talked through it one more time. The program is not complicated. It's set out on 25 pages of the big book. 63 to the bottom of 88, or top of 64 to the bottom, top of 64 to the top of 89, 25 pages. Yeah, there's a bit of step 1 and 2 before that. There's a bit of step 12 after that. But the meat and potatoes of it is on 25 pages, and it's not dense, the material. Most of it is stories and examples. The reason someone is resentful, whether it's me or you or Sally or the president of Russia, the reason why anyone is resentful is because they want to have their own way. And you're not going to lose the resentment until you lose the requirement that you have your own way. Until you say, I don't care if I get my own way or not, you're going to carry on being resentful. It's not complicated. Don't touch the material, because it's not about the material. The material is simply the hat that selfishness and self-centeredness is wearing today. Don't be fooled. You're not a psychoanalyst, so stop it. At some point in the program, I was reduced to relying on God because there was nothing else. You just have to hang out with God and repeat prayers until your consciousness changes. You have to read spiritual literature, listen to spiritual talks, sponsor other people until your consciousness changes. I didn't get well by analyzing the darkness. I got well by turning the light on. So don't go into the darkness with them, because you're not helping them. Show them where the light switch is. They'll be terrified. If someone is having a nightmare and you turn the light on, the light becomes part of the nightmare. But give it a bit, and then they'll realize they're awake. There's another game that I might call playoff. This is where sponsee comes to you with a problem. You say, right, I think, well, what I would suggest is this. And then they say the hands go on the hips, and they say, but the literature says, step 12 in the 12 and 12 says, concept 7 says, my previous sponsor said, Sally down the road said, what I've always heard in meetings is, but my therapist said, but you said. That's my favorite thing, when they quote you back to you as a reason why you're wrong. It's amazing. Don't engage with this. Bye-bye. Either do it or don't do it. I don't care. I've finished presenting the suggestion. Do you have any other topics for today? No? Great. Have a lovely rest of the day. As soon as you start playing that game, you can't win that game. The thing is about these games is you can't win any of them, so don't play them. The game is the payoff, so don't play it. How does now what you can legitimately do when someone is in an unwillingness funk, you can help them back to willingness. Not often. Normally, they just have to get beaten up by something in the world. You let alcohol or alcoholism do its work, and it's tedious and it's boring for everyone. But eventually, people's capacity for suffering is vast, but it's not unlimited. There comes a point at which everyone cracks at some point, and with a bit of luck, they'll crack before they die. But you can't make them crack. Now, sometimes the tools I'm about to give you are where someone is not willing, but they want to be willing, but they don't know how to get there. They're stuck. They recognize that they ought to be willing, but they just can't get there. And I'll tell you, I didn't make this, what I'm about to say up, I got it from somewhere. There are 5 steps back to willingness. Step number 1, to say, I don't like how I feel. We're not interested in who's right, who's wrong, what the story is. what the justification. I'll say, Sally, can you at least admit you don't like how you feel? How do you feel on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is unbearable tragedy, 10 is brilliant? Well, I feel a 2. How long have you been sober? 12 years. So, okay. So you've been sober 12 years. You feel a 2 out of 10. Agreed. Good. Why doesn't matter. You don't like how you feel. The next point is genius. And I'll put this as the I, because I use this process a lot. I don't like how I feel. So I hope I've been wrong. Because if I'm right, I'm going to be unhappy forever. So my best interests lie in me being wrong. I must be looking at this situation wrong. If I'm unhappy, I want to be wrong. I hope I have been wrong. So now we've got the 2 building blocks in place. Each one is built on the one before. I don't like how I feel, so I hope I have been wrong. Next point, I hope there is a different way. If I hope I've been wrong, sure, I hope there is a different way. I'm not even saying that there is one. I just say, I hope there is one. All this makes complete logical sense. I don't like how I feel, so I hope I've been wrong. I hope there is a different way. The next step, maybe there is a different way. I'm not saying there definitely is a different way to look at this. Just maybe there is a different way to look at this. And then the final step, what can I lose by asking? Because I can't end up unhappier. That where I am is already unhappy. There's nothing to lose by asking. And if those 5 stages, I'm going to put them in the chat because that won't kill anyone. I'll put them in the chat because I think they're very helpful. That is the way I bring myself back to willingness. If I'm unhappy, I'm wrong. The last tool I'm going to share before we go on to questions and answers, I don't know if we'll have 87 of those or none of those. If we have no questions, then we can all go home. The last tool is what I would call the WD-40 of sponsorship, which is the tool for sponsors, which if you don't know what else to do, you just give them something to do and say, come back when you've done it. And either they do it or they don't. If they do and come back, right, here's the next thing to do. If they don't come back, you're done. Fine, they can go to someone else. Here are some things that people have suggested. Maureen once suggested to me, this is when in London, this is way before mobile phones and the internet. You had a little thing called the A to Z, which was a little book with the maps of everywhere in London, tiny little thing, a little pocket version. You needed it to get to meetings. So you had your phone card for phone machines in the street. Someone explained to the kids what those are. Phone cards, you had a meetings listing, and you had you had an A to Z. And what she said to me one day was, get a pin. Have you got a pin or a pen? Suggestion. Open the A to Z, but don't look at it. Just open it randomly at any page and stab the pin or the pen in the book. I said, okay, done it. She said, now go there and come back. And when you come back, tell me about your experience. It was something to do. And it was better than me sitting in my room thinking about myself. 999 out of 1,000 problems that sponsees have boil down to, I'm sitting in a room on my own thinking about myself and I'm unhappy. Literally anything you suggest will be better than that. Go and clean the kitchen and come back. You can't, okay, clean just the cutlery in the kitchen and come back. Tom says, go and learn the lyrics to one of the songs from My Fair Lady or The King and I. It will not solve your problems, but at least now you will know the lyrics to a song from My Fair Lady or The King and I. Anything that you have, anything you force to run through your brain rather than what you are running through your brain is going to be healthier. There's one of my neighbors who's not very well, and he has the windows open wide open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And he puts on these audio books of management and finance textbooks, and they blare out when he can't deal with the world. I think he's got a good program. Because he knows that listening to that is going to be better than anything which would otherwise be running through his head. Or go and read a story at the back of the big book, or go and make a list of 10 things that you're grateful for. Go to a meeting and share some recent actions you've been taking in AA and what results you've got. Go and phone everyone in your phone book whose name begins with M, whether or not they are in the fellowship, and ask them about their day. Ask people about their day, and then you ask follow-up questions and further follow-up questions. And if they ask you how you are, you say, I'm doing great. I'm just reaching out to lots of people, making lots of phone calls and reconnecting with people that I've been negligent towards by being self-obsessed. That's your answer. Do not tell them how you are. And eventually you'll be fine. There's a line in the 12 and 12 that it's a very clever, it's a naughty little line, really. It says, virtually the only scoffers of prayer are those who haven't tried it enough, which now, this is encumbered with a logical fallacy, but don't worry about that, but because it's true. If you keep doing it, eventually it works. The last thing I'd say is, where does what I say come from? Comes from my experience. I understand millions of people in 12-step recovery. I'm not right, I'm me. So I get to share my experience. If it's helpful, that's splendid. If it's not, don't worry about it, because there are plenty of other people. I'm not the right sponsor for most people. If I were, I wouldn't have the number of sponsees I've got. I'd have 10 times as many or 100 times as many.